in this technical demonstration, we're going to create and configure authentication profiles. Now, as we've learned in our course, authentication profiles are going to be the environment aspects and policies that are going to be utilized for multi-factor authentication. Now, there's a couple of elements to this particular demonstration. First is that we need to make sure that we have our security questions set up. So what we're going to do here is I'm on the dashboard in the portal, and as you can see here, I haven't set those up yet. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Now, you can create custom security questions. You also have the capability of creating predefined security questions for specific consistency within the environment. For this particular example, as you can see here, I only have one question to answer, so I'm going to go ahead and add that in. Now, this will just be a custom question. So what street did I grow up on? This was on Main Street. And we'll go ahead and click Save. And now my security question's been satisfied. But again, we may need to make additional changes to enforce further security questions or other MFA challenges. So now that I have my security question satisfied, let's go ahead and create the authentication profile. So I'm going to scroll down here to the bottom under Settings and proceed to authentication. And as you can see here, we do have 3 specific pre-built default authentication profiles, one for new devices, one for other login, and one for password reset. Now we're going to create some new ones in this process of our training, but the first thing we're going to do is let's create that very first one. So we're going to click Add Profile. Now this is going to be a very standard one for our organization. We're just going to call this one Omicron MFA. And as you can see here, we do have 2 sets of challenges. The challenge options are the same, however. Password, mobile authenticator, OAuth O2P client, third-party radius authentication, FIDO UTF security key, and security questions. So the options here are going to be very specific that we want to enforce. Keep in mind, the user will get an opportunity to use any number of these that we select as the initial challenge, but they won't have to satisfy all of them. They'll only get 2 options in regards to multi-factor authentication. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select password, and we're going to select security questions. As you can see here, number of questions must be answered. I'm going to change this to 2. And we'll change our challenge pass-through duration. Now what this does is anytime we have to utilize the multi-factor authentication, we can then have a pass-through portion duration of time, so that if we log out and log back in, or if our session is expired, then I don't have to supply that multi-factor authentication a second time or a third time within that duration. Now, in this particular instance, I don't want to pass through, so I'm going to change this to no pass-through, which means I would have to supply MFA at any given time, anytime this profile is used. So now from here, we have the name, we have our challenges, and we have our pass-through. We'll press OK, and now we have our authentication profile. Now the authentication profile is just that. It's just a profile. It has to be applied to a policy. But before we add this to a policy, what we will need to do is we'll need to configure the security question option. So let's take a look at the security questions here under authentication. As you can see, there are none that are configured, but we did change our security question requirement from 1 to 2, but I've only satisfied 1, which means I'll have to satisfy a second one. In this particular instance, we're going to satisfy a predefined question. So I'm going to click Add, and I'm going to add just a couple of questions. First will be, what's my favorite color? We don't have to supply answers. That's taken care of by the user. We'll go ahead and click OK. Let's go ahead and create one more. What is your favorite sport? And once again, no answer is needed. We'll click OK. And now we have our predefined questions. So now if I proceed back up to my profile and I go to security questions, now at this point I have satisfied the security questions, but if I go ahead and click this, as you can see here, nothing has changed. I'll need to reload my rights, or I need to make sure that the profile is applied. So let's go ahead and we'll reload the rights. Once again, I'll go back over to my profile, and again, my security questions are not being prompted. Again, this is because the policy that is applied to me as an administrator. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and close out of the profile. And what we'll do is we'll come up to our policy, which is found under Access. And as you can see here, we only have one policy. We're going to go ahead and use this policy throughout this training, but you can create additional policies, if you wish, that can then be reordered in terms of priority. Now again, for this particular demonstration in this training, we're only going to focus on the default policy. So we'll go ahead and click the default policy. We're going to make just a couple of changes here. First of all, we're going to go over to user security policies. We're going to come down to user account settings. As you can see here, we do have a number of options to work with. One in particular is to enable users to configure security questions. And this is one we're going to change. So we're going to click yes. And as you can see here, here are our options. So the required number of user-defined questions is automatically set to 1. The required number of admin-defined questions is set to 0. This is because we haven't forced this onto our users, and why Alex Foster did not see more than one question prompt. So let's go ahead and change this. Let's change that to 2. We'll go ahead and save this option. And let's go ahead and reload Alex Foster's rights once again. Now that that's been taken care of, let's go ahead and come to the profile. We'll click security questions. And now, as you can see, I'm being prompted for 2 more questions. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and take a look. Oh, there are my 2 predefined questions that we added to the multi-factor authentication options. So we're going to start with the favorite color. And we'll come to the second one and change this one to the favorite sport. And we'll click Save. Now my security questions have in fact been updated. And I have now 3 in place. We'll go ahead and close the profile. Now again, all we've done at this point is enforced the security question options. Now let's apply multi-factor authentication using the authentication profile that we created earlier. So let's go ahead and move over to our policy settings. As you can see here, it's very, very simple. It applies to all users. Now at this point, we're going to move over to authentication policy settings. And we're going to go ahead and select Centrify Services. Later on, we'll see more about Centrify Clients and Centrify Server Suite agents. But for now, we're using the portal. We're going to go ahead and focus on Centrify Services. Now, within the authentication policy settings for Centrify Services, I can set authentication profiles in 2 different areas. The first is under the conditions, where we can apply authentication profile if a condition is met or not met. Now, I also need to set one up in cases where no conditions are matched. So we're going to make changes to both of these, and we're going to use the same authentication profile that we created earlier. So let's start with the condition set up here for the identity cookie. So I'm going to go ahead and click this option. Now I don't need to make any changes here. I can certainly add additional filters, but I don't really need to do that. So I'm going to leave this intact, but I am going to change the authentication profile. So if this condition is met, I want to use the Omicron MFA. So I'm going to go and click OK. Now in cases where none of the conditions are met, we still want to enforce that MFA. Now it may look different. It may require additional component layers, but for this particular demonstration, I'm going to use the same Omicron MFA, and we'll click Save. So now I've satisfied my security questions as part of my challenge within the authentication profile, because that's what we have set. If we were using something like OAuth OTP or third-party radius, those options would have to be configured as well. But in this particular instance, we're only focusing on the password and security questions. So now, if I go ahead and log out as Alex Foster, and I attempt to re-log in, my first challenge was my password. So if my password were compromised, for example, I would still be prompted at the next level for further authentication to verify my identity. Now, again, right now, all I have are security questions. If multiple options had been utilized, they would appear in this list. But once again, we're only going to focus on security questions. I'll go ahead and click Next. And now I have to satisfy 2 security questions. So let's go ahead and answer those. And click Next. And as you can see, I'm back into the portal. So as you can see, I can apply MFA at different levels. Later on in this course, you'll learn how we apply MFA to other specific administrative tasks and usage of resources within the portal.